Many stories have been told about miracles and other unusual experiences that have happened to people when facing adversity or even confronting death. Jacqui Greaves was a young woman who faced certain death on a Scottish mountain and encountered strange experiences that appeared to aid her, and she claimed even saved her life. She believes she was not alone for the 2 nights she had spent on the mountain. Chantel Lakey was another young woman who, when faced with certain death on a mountain near the ocean, also received help from an unknown power. The following are 2 true stories told by women who swear their lives were saved by a greater power. Story number 1. Jacqui Greaves was a young woman from Lancashire, England, who loved mountain climbing, and on the 13th of February 1994, she set off to climb Derry Cairngorm, one of Britain's highest peaks in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. The strange experiences that happened to her on this climb would have her question her own perceptions of reality. Climbing high mountains can be extremely dangerous and challenging, as there can be sudden changes in conditions where even experienced mountaineers have perished. Jacqui was climbing with a small party, and the weather was ideal when they started their ascent. They had not gone too far up the mountain when the weather completely changed, bringing snow and gale force winds straight off of the Arctic. As the party were deciding to call it quits, Jacqui suddenly fell, and as a group were not roped together, Jacqui quickly became separated from the team, where she lost her footing in the harsh conditions and began to roll and roll. She tried jamming her ice axe to break her fall, but then the axe flew out of her hands. She suddenly found herself laying on the side of a ridge with no ice axe for grip. She had no idea how far she'd fallen, but feared it was now a long way from the group, and she was also worried about falling over the edge. As she was an experienced climber, she was not panicked and calmly thought about her situation and how to get out of it. She was cold and numb and started clapping and singing to warm herself. Unbeknown to her, the rescue party had set off, but to the wrong mountain. Jacqui was to face the next 16 hours alone in freezing conditions, which is where her first unusual experience happened. As she was laying there, a light appeared about 50 feet above her, and at first she thought it was a torch from her rescuers, but the light stayed there all night long. But she knew it wasn't the moon or the sun, but had somehow found the light comforting. In the morning, she decided to take a chance and started walking, but feeling cold and exhausted, and started to fear for her life. As she struggled down the mountain in the blinding whiteness, the next unusual experience happened. As she was slowly walking, a barrier suddenly dropped in front of her, forcing her to stop. It was like a barrier on a railway level crossing, which is what she thought had happened, and her hopes were immediately raised, and was looking around for a telephone box to ring for help, believing she was back near civilization. But as she slowly looked around, she realized she was still on the mountain. She quickly looked down to touch the barrier, but it suddenly disappeared in front of her eyes, and as she looked to where the barrier had been, she saw a deep hole. So she quickly turned to her right, whereupon another barrier dropped, and as she went to lay a hand upon it, it too suddenly disappeared, and once again, under the apparition, was another hole. Jacqui thought, someone is showing me the right way to go, and headed back up where she encountered no more barriers. She believed she must have been hallucinating, yet also realised the barriers had saved her from certain death. So was this the workings of her own mind, or some supernatural intervention that had saved her life? She then proceeded to walk in a daze, losing all sense of feeling and time. But then a strange feeling came over her, where she felt euphoric and suddenly found she had left her body and was now walking through a beautiful blue landscape with flowers, trees and bridges, where all the cold had left her. Jacqui believed she was on the verge of death and felt at peace and totally contented. She was no sooner contemplating this paradise than suddenly found herself drifting back to the snow. As she was again ploughing through the snow, she somehow felt different. She was now feeling invigorated and full of energy. It was now starting to get dark, and she feared that she would have to spend another night on the mountain, and built herself a snow hole to protect her from the cold. She had the feeling that without the snow hole, she would go back to that blue paradise, and this time she would not return. That night, Jacqui knew she could not afford to fall asleep, and sang to herself all night long. The next morning, she dug her way out of her snow hole and found herself surrounded by 4 high walls that were perfectly straight and well constructed. But where did they come from and who built them? They had obviously been put there for extra protection. She then knocked down the walls, and as she looked up, that strange warm light had reappeared in the sky, but this time it was casting a V-shaped shadow down the slope, as if pointing the direction she must now follow. As she followed the light, a shape started to materialize from the haze. Then standing in front of her was a dog. It walked up to her and started licking her, and slowly 2 figures appeared. She'd been rescued. Had Jacqui experienced genuine mystical assistance, as they certainly aided her when she needed them? And did she have a near-death experience? Or were they simply hallucinations, given the severe conditions that her body had been put under? Story number 2. In the 1980s, Chantel Lakey and her fiancé Dale Thompson were driving along the Pacific Coast Highway in California when he suddenly pulled over, telling Dale that he knew where there was magnificent views of the ocean. The couple climbed to the top of a trail through a dense forest that grew on the steep trail overhanging the coast. After admiring the views, they started their steep descent down the mountain. Dale thought he'd take a quicker way down, but soon realised they'd taken a treacherous route covered in loose shale and rocks. To make matters worse, the sun had started to go down, and it was starting to rain, which now had made the path slippery. They both suddenly realised that they could not go back up the mountain and had no other option but to go down. Dale led the way, regularly looking back to ensure that Chantel was safe. Tragically, the last time he looked around, he suddenly slipped and fell to his death on the rocks below. Chantel was now in shock and grabbing hold of anything that could secure her balance. She said she was not religious, but was now crying out to God for help. What happened to her next, she truly believed, saved her life, when suddenly out of nowhere, a bright light appeared and then a gateway opened up where she found herself surrounded by angels. She saw them as a wall of protection that was holding her close. After a few minutes, she found herself looking up at the mountain from the road. She had somehow descended, but had no idea how she got there. When the rescue team went to retrieve her fiance's body, they said there was absolutely no way they could have used the same trail that Chantel had used to descend. And even with their combined experience and equipment, it would have been impossible for them to access. So we asked the question, how the hell did Chantel manage to get down from the treacherous mountain? And where did the white lights come from that apparently lifted her out of danger and saved her from certain death?